So if we had known that all this setup, we were not going to use it, we should have just not set it up. I was just like, so we finished setup at 2. And I was like, oh, okay, we can start. Went out, and I'm like, well, God, next time can you do this like that for morning? That'd be nice. But, so yeah, I'm glad that we're all here. The lights are still kind of turning on, so give it a minute. But I'm glad that we're here. We are here on time, For those who walk in at 3, you know what they did wrong. They didn't put their clock forward. But yeah, I'm glad that we're all here. I know it's a smaller group, and no one's in the front row. I noticed that too, except DK, but that's...
Too late.
Yeah, up, yeah. But it's okay. I am glad that we're all here. Thank you, Matt. I'm glad that we're here because, it was a wonderful week. Not to single them out, but one of my coworkers here was here, and we actually had a collaborative working space, and we had a meeting together in a very open frame environment. We had lunch outside, so that was great because we got to enjoy God's beauty and nature, even maybe when our boss probably wouldn't have approved of that. But yeah, I'm glad that we're all here and we're just ready to receive. And I was just kind of thinking about what we can talk about. And I was like, okay, I was trying to see if I can connect last week's message to this week's message. And I was thinking, I had a few things in my heart. I'm like, but God, nothing really connects. And then PD speaks about family. And for those of you who weren't here last week, we talked about family and how we should be the family of Christ together, and that we should treat each other like family. And that made me start thinking, well, I'm an only child, so I don't have any brothers or sisters. I have my mom and my dad, but then that's pretty much me. And then I was thinking, okay, my extended family, my uncle, he lives in Georgia now. He's with his children. They have children now, and so technically I'm an uncle, but I've never met them, and so that's kind of on my to-do list as well. But I'm like, okay, then that's all I have in my extended family. And everyone else is in Korea, which is pretty much the story for a lot of Koreans. It's all of our family is back where our family is. And I'm like, okay, well, if we're really to be family, I'm wondering if we here truly treat each other like brothers and sisters, or would it be like if I went back to Korea and been like, hey, I know we're family, nice to see you, but that's it. And I was thinking, how can we truly live out a life of being like family with one another? And I was thinking, okay, and I'm just thinking, I'm like, okay, well, PD was speaking about the second greatest commandment, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And as I was meditating on that, and I was thinking, and I was like, wait a second, but Jesus said there's the greatest commandment, which is love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And as I was meditating on that, I was thinking, you know what? It would be impossible for us to love one another if we really don't know what it's like to love God. And I was just thinking, I was like, man, that's so profound. And I was like, okay, well then let's think about how that's even possible. And I really feel like this is more of and for some of us, we just had oh God, please don't send me there. Because we are going to be persecuted, and I don't, go to North Korea. What if God said go to North Korea? How willingly would we say, all right, I'm going? But to really love him with all of your soul, you'd be like, okay, you know what? Even for the sake of my life, I'm still going. Just not even regarding the life. Loving the Lord your God with all of your mind is loving our God and loving his intellect and his law and his gospel more than our own understanding. So when we look at the laws of the world and we're like, oh, okay, I agree with this, I agree with that, but what if at one point God is saying, you know what? Hey, those people that hate you, yeah, love them. You mean the people who curse you, the people who are after you, go ahead. You know what? Love them. And you're like, but what if they did something horrible to you? What if they legitimately, hurt you? We see, what was it? The Golden State Warriors coach, he had a huge accident. And he was like, you know what? I forgive him and I love him. And are we able to live out and love God in that way? Loving the Lord with all of our strength, we're going to need that in about 30 minutes or so when we love him through our physical labor. And I say that as we tear all this stuff down. We're going to need people who are going to love God with their strength. Lawrence, I'm looking at you, by the way, but we're going to need people who, with their strength, they're going to love God. And it's in those four facets that we really love God. And I was like, okay, that's a very long-winded response in what it means to really love God. So I really wanted to narrow it down to one word only. And I think it's really funny because God's a funny God. And I found it really ironic how everything was going. And the word that God put on my heart was worship. So today we're just going to talk about worship, which I found really cool because we did not need this speaker. We've gone through 5 of them already. And we're going on number 6, maybe number 7, because God says 7 is a perfect number. Maybe we'll go through 7. Who knows? I don't know. But we don't need this for worship anymore. You know, all we needed, we honestly did not even need, no offense, Matt to play guitar. We don't need these things. That's not worship and what worship really is. So what I want us to do is kind of look at worship, because that's going to be the key to unlock how do we love our neighbors as ourselves. And so kind of giving you a blueprint of where we're going to go is first with to define worship. So we're going to define worship first. And then we're going to go into Scripture. And we're going to see so in order for us to define worship, I know this is going to sound crazy. I know it's being recorded. Well, no, maybe technical difficulties over there. We're just having technical difficulties everywhere. But we're going to remove God from the scenario for just 1 second. No stones. Okay, cool. It's not heresy. The reason why I say that is because God invented worship. And I feel like it's not a God thing either. We are meant to worship just overall. We are worshipers. And God has created us to worship. And of course, when we have God as the object of our worship, that's the proper form. But we all worship in some way, shape, or form. So it's not a God thing. It's not a Jesus thing. It's not a Christian thing. We are just worshipers. As human beings, we are programmed to worship. And so that's why we're taking away God for just a second, and then we're going to put him back in moving forward. So don't say it's heresy, because God will be the center of it, I promise. So what is worship? Well, Webster's Dictionary defines it as extravagant respect or admiration for or devotion to an object. So extravagant respect or admiration for or devotion to an object. And so if we really think about it, if we use that definition, we worship a lot of things. Now, some we worship in grand style, and sometimes not so much. And for me, one way I look at it is I'm a huge fight fan. I'm a huge UFC fan, and whether that's, controversial or not, I get that. But I remember, I'm a huge fight fan. So whenever I'm watching it on the screen, I'm like, oh my gosh, these human beings are fantastic. They're phenomenal. Look at them fighting their craft. And there's a respect, and I admire them because I know for a fact I can't do any of that. I don't have 1 ounce of what Ronda Rousey could do, or what Conor McGregor, or who these fighters are. And I say this because I remember I went to my first event last year, and it was fantastic. And I was there and I was watching it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm right next to where they walk out. So I get to if I stick up my hand, they're gonna hit back, and they're gonna high five me back. And it was legitimately I was like, wow. I was like, hey! And they're able to touch me back and hit gloves. And I was like, that's so cool. But and then I'm looking at it right now, I'm using this definition. That was me admiring them. I would look at these fighters and I'm like, oh my gosh, I see these people on TV, but now I get to see them from my own eyes. And if we look at that in a smaller sense of worship, it was the best time of my life. We see that even with younger folks and teeny boppers. And it's like, oh my gosh, Justin Bieber, and then they just go post it. Maybe not him because he's getting older now. I don't know who the latest teen heartthrob is. But that's the way that we're ingrained to worship. But then I started to break it down. Why do we worship? Why do we do that? Why? What's the whole point of it? And as I was thinking, I was just like, man, you know why? Because in the process of worship, I'm kind of creating some sort of relationship with that object. That's why it meant so much when the fighter was passing by and I was able to touch their gloves and everything. I was like, wow. I was able to create this relationship, and it was like, oh my gosh. And that's how worship is created. We create this connection with whatever we worship. So whether it's we worship money, because there's some sort of association with us with it, maybe it's fame, but in some way, shape, or form, when we worship, we draw a connection with the object that we worship. And we draw closer to it. But it's never free. Worship is never free. If we wanted to worship with our sound system and our mixer, all that was not free. When I had to go to watch that UFC event, I had to give up my time because it was an earlier card, so I had to wake up and I lost sleep. It cost a lot of money. It cost resources. Worship has some sort of sacrifice attached to it. That no one just worships and there's nothing given up. Sometimes it's our mind and we're thinking about it and we just let it consume our thoughts. Or sometimes we just throw money at it. And for me, going there, I was able to spend money to get these wonderful seats. So there's a price to worship. And whatever that price is, I say it all the time. The money I spent for that UFC event, I would gladly pay if I had that same experience. That it's actually the price tag that you pay and the pleasure and the satisfaction that you get, it's incomparable. You can't compare it. When you do a little, I forget the weighing things, I forget what it's called, about a balance, you're like, okay, how much did I pay? But what did I get out of it? And true worship, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't care what I paid, it was so worth it. And that's in itself what worship is. Worship is an experience where we get to get connected with whatever the object of our worship is. And there's a price that's paid. And we look at that price and we're like, you know what? It doesn't matter because whatever I'm getting out of it is so much greater than the price that I paid. And it's at this point now, we bring God back into this. My question for us today, and just to start off, are we truly worshiping God? Because if we're really looking at it, are we worshiping God and saying, oh, I don't want to give up so much, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, you know what? And I don't want to I don't want to look uncomfortable. I want to be comfortable and worship God. And I'll tell you this right now, my wallet wasn't comfortable. I wasn't comfortable when I went to go to watch the fights. And that was in a very small sense. But when we look at it, are we truly worshiping God? Are we too busy about our own comfort? And we're looking at the cost-benefit analysis, and we're like, you know what? No, it's not worth it. Then the question that we can ask right now, just to start with, is, are we truly worshiping God? And I found it ironic, because I'm like, I'd rather not have this, because this is a lot of money. I'd rather not have that and have true worship. Because the price tag here, you can give $1 million, I don't care. True worship to God is worth more than $1 million. And so with that idea of worship in mind, now let's go to our text. So if you want to turn your Bibles or tap to your Bible app to Exodus 32. So that for those of you who don't know, that's the second book of the Bible, and to be cute, it's between 31 and 33. So Exodus 32. And we're only going to really look at the first 6 verses, because that in itself is going to show worship. So as we're looking into it, I encourage everyone to, it sounds simplistic, but read the Bible. I know a lot of us here are going through the Bible, and our goal is this year, read the entire Bible. And I know PD had encouraged us, and I know I'm starting that up again this year. And it's interesting because you're like, wait, Exodus, that's so weird. And I'm going to tell you this right now, the testimony that I have just kind of and how this message came across. As I said, I was thinking about what to preach on because I knew this way in advance. And I'm like, God, I don't know. And God used this in a radical way for my life, and I really feel like altogether this would benefit us. But that only came through me diligently reading the Bible. So if you haven't started, it's not too late. I know you're like, well, in 2 weeks, a fourth of the year is gone. You still have plenty of time. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. A fourth of the year is already gone. But when this month ends, it's kind of crazy. But anyway, I encourage everyone to read their Bible, and if you haven't, go ahead and start wherever, but the goal is for this year for us to read the entire Bible. So Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off all the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with the graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So here, using the definition of worship that we just defined, it's exactly, this in itself is worship. So to kind of set the scenario, really brief synopsis, Moses, he's up on the mountain. He said, 40 days, I'm going to be God. I'm going to gather how God wants us to live. You guys chill, meditate, and I'll be back in 40 days. And so that's the scenario. And then 32, he's still up there, and this happens. So that's kind of the context of it in a very condensed way. But when we look at it, that definition of worship still fits. And if we look at it, we see, okay, what was their reasoning for worship? Well, the reasoning why they wanted to worship is because they got out of Egypt. Moses took them out, and they're like, hey, we need to worship the fact that, okay, we got out. And the cool thing about this is I was really meditating on it. Their intent and their desire for worship wasn't wrong. They legitimately wanted to worship God who took them out. They had a legitimate desire for worship. Again, if we look down later, which we'll go to, the reason why God was angry wasn't their desire for worship, it was how their worship manifested. So again, it reveals the truth again that we are all designed for worship. And so when we're going back to that, it's like, okay, God took us out of Egypt. That was their purpose. And what did they have to give up? Gold. They took off all the gold earrings, they took off all the gold rings, they took off all of that, and that was their sacrifice. That was the price that they had to pay, which is a huge sacrifice. Gold is even precious to this day. And several years ago, they were saying, hey, bring us your gold, we'll give you cash, so they can, because it's still a precious commodity. And so the price that they paid was gold. And for them, that was like, okay, but the experience that I'm about to receive is so much more than the gold that I had. Using that same definition of worship, it still fits into here. But if we look at verse 7 and 8, God was not pleased. And if you have your thumbs there, we can look on with me. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" I'm going to steal this water. So God was not pleased with their worship. And there are three reasons why. And when we're looking at this, clearly this was not the proper method of worship, and it's worth investigating. Because I absolutely hate history, but in this situation, their mistakes can become our successes as we learn from their mistakes. Because clearly God was not happy. And when I was looking at this and really defining, figuring out why God was not happy, there are three reasons why. Number one was that the Israelites were completely ignoring the call from God. That they disobeyed the call from God. And you're thinking, how so? Moses was the person who was in charge of them and who was really in charge of taking care of the Israelites. And he said 40 days. And some commentary said that that was on the 39th day that happened. And I was just like, you've been to 39 days? What's one more? Like, I'd understand if it was like 10 days. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, it's been 10 days. I know he said 40, but it's been 10. All right, let's push tempo. Oh, wait, maybe 20 days you can make, but 39 days was what one commentator said. I was like, 30, like, just one more day. It may have been just hours, who knows? But the fact that their calling from God was to wait and be patient for 40 days. And that was their first misstep right there. That they did not follow the call of God. And my question for us today is, for some of us, maybe that's what we're missing. Maybe that's what our first step is going wrong. Maybe God's calling us to wait for 40 days. Maybe God is saying, you know what, right now you want to do all these things. You want to do this ministry. You want to do this, that. You know what? No. Be still and know that I'm God. Maybe God is just saying, you know what? Hold up. You know what? Be still and know that I'm here, and I'm going to say when you go. But and we'll see that there is a reason for it. But for some of us, we want to do all these things, and God's just saying, hold it. Not yet. And for some of us, it's the inverse. God is saying, go, do it. And you're like, oh, I don't know. Was that really God? Maybe that was just me. Maybe it was just like a really good, like, maybe they just plucked at my heartstrings a little bit, and it's just, they're questioning God. Friday, I went to dinner for Young Life. I really feel like God was kind of the orchestrator of that. So the background story is Thursday at work, our parent liaison said, hey, you should go to this Young Life dinner. And I was like, okay, maybe. And we connected, and I ended up going on Friday. And it was really fascinating. First and foremost, it was a fundraiser, and I was like, oh. And I was like, I don't have money and anything like that, but I wanted to learn more about Young Life. And as I was sitting there and just enjoying their free food, which is the best kind of food if you ask me, I was just soaking everything in. And I actually saw a few of my students there from Herndon. I was like, that's so cool. Like, I mean, I knew a few, but then I didn't really, like, I was like, okay, cool, they're here. And then they did their program, and then they had this video package. And I was just looking at it, and I was watching it, and I saw two of my students. And I really only knew them through Powder Puff, so I had no idea about their background, I had no idea, and they were just talking about how much they love God. And I was just sitting there, and I'm like, huh, wow, that's fascinating to me. I had no idea that they love God, and that they're willing to share their faith like that. And it was, again, it's a fundraiser. So, you know, they're plucking all these heartstrings, they're trying to get these fat checks, you know, it takes $1.2 million for them to exist in Fairfax. This is not like, I'm not trying to sell for them, I'm just telling you the story. And then at the end, I was just like, the guest speaker, they're like, hey, we need people who are all in. And I'm just like, man, it's like, that was what I was feeling. I'm like, are they just messing with my emotions? Because they know that I'm just there, interested to learn about Young Life. And I was like, I kind of want to get involved, but all in, it's a little bit too much. And I was like really wrestling with that. But as I'm really looking at it, I'm like, man, God sent me to Herndon for a reason. And that was one of the things for me. But I could have easily questioned. I'm like, okay, was that just a really great presentation for them to elicit a response? Or was that a legitimate calling from God? And I knew in the deepest of my hearts that was, while they were good, God was greater. And God was actually wanting me to get involved in Young Life in some way. And my question for us right now, and I'm spending more time on this, is some of us are being called to do something, but we're not doing it. And we're not following the call of God. And maybe that's where our misstep is in worship. Number two, they disobeyed God's command. They had the 10 commandments. The second commandment is, you shall not make a carved image. And what did they do? It legitimately verbatim, they made a carved image. And for some of us, we are not following the commands of God. For what that means is some of us, you know what? I don't mean to be that kind of person, especially because I'm really not a full pastor and ordained pastor yet, but some of us, we need to be more faithful with what we have. Tithing. Simple. There's the simplistic call of tithing. God says, give back to what we've received. Or maybe, a really touchy subject, sexual immorality. Maybe some of us are still living in that. Or maybe there's greed, forgiveness. All of these things that God has commanded us to do. We need to obey God. And one of the reasons why, it legitimately, again, verbatim, quoting God, they have disobeyed my command. And for some of us, the worship that we have, maybe, you know what, it's not pleasing because we are disobeying God's command of forgiveness or, being hospitable or anything of that like. So are we obeying God's command? Number 3. So first, they ignored the call of God. Then, they also disobeyed God's command. The third one is they corrupted God's worship. And again, I'm quoting God here. He's a reliable source. Verse 6, it says, and they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. Good. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That sounds like just a normal, nothing. If you really don't read that, you miss out what that meant. And I've read the Message version. They're saying, they went and partied, and it was a wild party. And what they meant by wild party, they meant straight up whatever the worldly ways of worship was. And in other words, that meant fornication and orgies. So they legitimately tried to worship God with orgies. And last time I checked, God and orgies do not mix. You can quote that too. All of a sudden, Pete's like, what do you talk about? God and orgies don't mix. Like, I hope that's not what you guys say. When Pete comes back, that'd be like the worst ever. But they used a pagan type of worship to worship a holy God. And they corrupted the type of worship that we have. And I know for some of us, you're like, that can't be us. Really, when was the last time when we asked, how come worship isn't entertaining enough? How come church in itself is not entertaining enough? How come it doesn't have all these things? How come it doesn't satisfy my needs? How come it doesn't do this, that, or that? Because that's corrupting God's worship. We're using worldly views and bringing it into the pulpit, into this holy temple. So my question for us is, how often are we like, hey Matt, great praise, but you know what? Because it didn't work, it wasn't that entertaining. You know what? And I didn't really get blessed. And sometimes, and that's the real reason, we shouldn't be looking to Matt, we shouldn't be looking at the praise leader, we shouldn't be looking at the speaker, we need to be looking at our own hearts. And because our hearts and what we bring, are we really bringing these outside influences into the church? Because that's corrupting the worship of God. And so it was those 3 things. But you see, it was interesting. And when we really start to apply these things, it pierces so hard. Because going into the application portion of this passage completely wrecked me, and here's the reason why. Remember how I said I was reading my Bible, and I've been reading it pretty much every single day. Well, there was one day I didn't. And that one day, my old sinful nature came out. And I knew in the morning, I'm like, you know what? Okay, I know I didn't read it, but I need to because I know what happens when I don't. And my days are completely different once I read it and when I don't read it. Even sometimes I'm reading, like right now I'm reading Leviticus, and everyone's like, oh, man, we need to pray for you. Like, no, it's actually been really fascinating. Because what you have to do is you have to look at it in the perspective of Christ. Once you see Christ in Leviticus, Leviticus changes. Not all the time, but a lot of it, I'm just like reading it, I'm like, okay, this is Christ and what he did. The call for all these specifications is for what holiness is to look like, and Christ is now providing that. And it's really fascinating. But yeah, so going back, one day I didn't, and one day I fell in sin. And I kid you not, it was probably like Exodus 31 and 30. And I was begrudgingly just reading through. That next day, I'm like, you know what? I know I didn't read it, and it really bothered me, so I had to double read to catch up on my daily plan. And I stumbled across this. And it was in this moment, God convicted me that Exodus 32 is exactly what happened that day I sinned. That the reason why, the core of what this passage is really saying, is we have to understand the previous chapters. Because the previous chapters, again, Moses went to go up to get the plan from God. And this plan was for fellowship. This plan was for just narrowing that gap of sin. And again, if we read it, there's like these precious jewels, these precious gems. There's this robe, like clothing, and it's going to make you completely holy. And again, it's like giving you a new identity. And that was the whole intent of what was going on. But the sad thing is, the Israelites satisfied with just some small golden calf. And if we really understand that God had this whole plan, he had, oh my gosh, you know what? I want you to get closer to me. I want you to know who I am. I want you to be holy. I want you to know my ways. But yet you settled for a stupid golden cow. And that was, and when I was looking at it, and that was my own sin. My sin was so appealing. It was so satisfying. I won't even lie. But I forgot for a split second what God had promised for me. And the fellowship that he had for us. And it was like so heartbreaking to me. Because it's like, man, all the sin that we have, God's ways are so much greater than that. And that was what, at the core of this passage is really saying. That we have these golden idols, and it's going to be satisfying. And you know what? There is going to be some value. Gold has value. But you know what? When it comes, and it pales into comparison to the fact that, you know what? Okay, these precious gems, these jewels, the precious clothing, the fine linen, all that is a representation of the fellowship that I want to have with you. How often does our object of worship want to draw near to us? Never. Only one thing. God. And like, as I was really looking at this and looking at my own sin, I'm just like, wow, I forgot that God has such a greater plan. And once we continue to worship these idols, we're worshiping and settling for second best. And God has this huge plan already set up for us. And he's like, you know what? I want you to be closer to me. I want you to be holy with me. You know what? The identity that you have, you're gone. And we're worshiping these idols in our lives. And when God is saying, you know what? I have something so much greater. And that rocked me. Because I'm like, in the like, legitimately, like 12 hours later, I was reading that, and I'm just like, oh, God. I completely missed the mark. And for some of us, we need to start evaluating our lives. What is our idol? You know, and sometimes it is because of one of the three things that the Israelites did. Maybe we are disobeying the call from God. We are idolizing our thoughts and our ways above God's thoughts and God's ways. Or maybe sometimes we're just disobeying God's command. You know what? God said, hey, don't get drunk. Oh, hey, don't have sex outside of marriage. And you're like, you know what? Let's go. Let's party. Or some of us, we're bringing in that corruptible worship in here. And it's not always that clear. There's a few of us who, and this is my counselor side coming out of me, there's some of us who, we have a smile on our face, but we know deep down we're broken. We're like, oh my gosh, wait, okay, that sounds all good for like the normal Christian, but Ken, you don't know my life. You don't know the brokenness that I have. You know what you said, family? Yeah, I don't have a family. Yeah, my sinful family, you know what? No, I don't have a family that I can really consider love. I don't see that. And my question for you is this. That in itself is an idol, and why do you think God's plan cannot be that? Because again, God has this huge plan. He has this plan to restore us. This plan for us to draw near and for us to be complete in Him. But yet, we're holding on to this brokenness. And sometimes even the brokenness could be an idol, where we're saying, you know what? My mind is so much more important than what God has. And so that was the individual application for me. But on a corporate level, and this also wrecked me too, was, and God was convicting me, like, you know what? Test Sunday worship. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's the holiest of the holy. There's no way that could be an idol. And God was like, oh yeah? How much time did you spend preparing for this sermon? And I told him a lot. I prayed, I meditated, I researched. I was like, good. How about the times you're not preparing the sermon? And I was just like, yeah. Because God's desire for all of us is that this should not be the pinnacle of our worship every week. The pinnacle of our worship every week should be every single day. That if this is the most that we're worshiping on a weekly basis, something is wrong with that picture. And again, it pales into comparison to what God has for us. God's design for us is not for us to just be here, once a week. Sometimes I'll come out twice a week for prayer meetings. That is not God's design. God's design is for us to be with Him forever, every single day. And when we really look at that, and I was looking at that in my life, I'm like, man. And it's so easy because, I'm a leader here, and I serve. But then I'm like, man, I should be serving and being relentless and passionate every single day. And spending time with the Lord every single day. But am I really putting Sunday worship on a pedestal? I should be preparing. I should just genuinely want to know more about God every single day. And so my question for us is, corporately, if this is the most we worship all week, there's something wrong with that. And we really need to check ourselves. And then the flip side, maybe some of us are serving more, except Sunday. That's another dangerous one too. And I'm just like, okay, if we're serving, and again, if we look at the Israelites, their intent and desire for serve was not wrong. They wanted to worship, and they wanted to worship whomever got them out of Egypt. But they worshiped and they manifested it in an improper way. My question for you is, for those who are worshiping more outside than in here, again, that is not God's intent as well. Because we are meant to be family. We are meant to be the body of Christ. And we are meant to take care of one another. And if you're taking care of other needs, well, that's not wrong. But if we're neglecting what we have here, then there's something wrong with that picture as well. And we really need to evaluate the idols. Because if we read down later, what Moses did, he came down and he smashed those idols. So that way we can have a proper view of worship. And my question for us today is, when we're really looking at it, where are our idols? Because sometimes they're so hard to find. But God wants us to smash those idols so that we can enjoy all the things that He has planned for us. And His design was that for us to be holy before Him. And again, when we're looking at it from the full perspective of, how does this have to do with anything with serving the family and really being a body of Christ? Remember, I said that the beginning is it starts with us, and it starts with our worship. And my question is, if we cannot be, I know for a fact, we cannot be a family if we don't worship God individually. If we don't take care of the greatest commandment, there's no way we will take care of the second greatest commandment. Because it's an overflowing. Fulfilling the first commandment and the greatest commandment, it overflows into fulfilling the second. And so, if we really look at that, it's crazy. Because that's what God's desire is for our lives. I'm going to end with this. Exodus 35, we don't have to read it, we don't open up to it. But what happened was they started to build the temple. And if you read it, they gather all the skilled worksmen. And they gather everyone. They're like, hey, let's build this temple. And if you think about it, that would have been so cool. That's such a cool thing. Whoa, wait a second. I'm building the object that's going to allow us to fellowship with God. That was their responsibility. Whether they realized that that was the macro level of things, that was the intent of it. And I just want to set this reminder. Jesus Christ fulfilled the Old Testament. So through Jesus Christ, what He is saying, you know what? This temple that you're supposed to be in, yeah, I am now that temple. Oh, the new clothing that I'm going to put on you and make you holy, yeah, I'm going to put that on you. And then this body that we're building up, this temple that we're building up, I'm recruiting you for that too. And that's the totality of who Jesus is. He's saying, you know what? All these things. And we get to have that ability to come to Him. But it all starts with worship. And it all starts with our individual worship, so then we can corporately worship together. Because the outside world is going to look at us, and they're going to look at us and say, where is this Jesus that you guys are professing? And That's because we are now the body of Christ. Christ has now ascended, and now we are doing the work of Christ. And if our body is unhealthy, then we're not going to be able to do what we're supposed to do. When you have, right now, my toe hurts. You're like, wait, you're walking around. How's that possible? I don't know either. But my toe hurts, but it affects my entire body. In that same way, one defect affects the entire body, and we need to help each other out. But it all starts, before we can help each other out, it all starts with one spot, and we have to really question whether we really love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I want to end with this passage. Romans 12:1. That's my life verse. I know you guys are like, Ken, you have a lot of life verses. Last time you spoke, it was about Romans 8:28. Yeah, I have a lot of life verses. But Romans 12:1. Therefore, I urge you, in view of God's mercies, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And our act of worship is to be a living sacrifice. And to really worship, we have to love God with all of our heart. No other bodily, no other presence is above God. Love heart with all of our soul. I will do anything that he says, even if that means going to North Korea or going to a place where I will be persecuted. With all of your mind. Doesn't matter what I think, God's ways are higher than my ways. With all of our strength. With all of our physical strength. It's only until we really do that can we really love each other as a family. But it's not just for the sake of loving each other as a family, because we have bigger stakes. It's not for us to just to coexist. Our stakes are so much bigger than that. Because the world is going to look at us, and they're going to look for God, and they're going to look for Jesus. My question for us, it all starts with worshiping God. And are we going to truly worship God, not just today on a holy Sunday, not just in 2 weeks when it's Easter Sunday, but every single day? Are we going to truly worship